Awesome. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So you stole my thunder a little bit because I had a whole intro ready, and you kind of already did that. So I'm going to jump right into some of the questions. So both ParaFi and Dragonfly have had early conviction in the DePIN's sector. I think both of you guys have already been invested in the vertical since like 2022, either led rounds or participate in like large rounds. Some of it being for sizable dollar figures, $15 plus raises. I'll start with you, Ani. What gives Dragonfly the conviction to actually invest in this space with such large capital sums? And also, like, what is the things that Dragonfly is underwriting? Is it revenues? Is it network growth on the supply side? Is it like maybe utilization of the network from like a supply and demand side? It's like, what are those fundamental things that Dragonfly looks at when they're looking at investing in the DePIN vertical?
Yeah, that's a good question. But firstly, thanks to Mahesh, Sal, Vinny for having us here. It's been a great day so far. But yeah, I mean, I think at the time in 22 when we were really digging into the DePIN stuff, I mean, one of the big questions for us always is there really demand in this like crypto sector, right? I mean, there's so many cases of a flash in the pan that you see in like the space, and you'll have a theme that kind of goes for a few months, but does it really last? Is it secular? Will people really want it? I mean, there's a great Mark Andreessen quote where he basically articulates the fact that like if you have a big enough market, it'll pull product from the startup, right? And so at the time in 22, FTX had just happened, of course, and like I think people's spirits were a bit down. But when we were really digging into Andrino, we saw an incredible team, a phenomenal product, and just such a fast-growing market that like if you added crypto into this thing, it would be rocket fuel for the network effect. And I think that's really what we like, where we're not just trying to see if crypto is an ancillary thing, but like how do you really bake crypto into the product in a way that makes sense? And I think that's really the only way to make it like a secular kind of vision, where otherwise the market just gets smarter, right? And people, especially in this room, are not stupid. And I think that's been one of the nice parts about, I think, digging into the DePIN space, where it's like, how do you make great products that are durable and built to last, but where crypto can really play a strong, influential role in making it successful.
Anjan, you too?
Yeah, I mean, with DePIN, it's interesting how we've gone through these waves of, I remember in 2021, the euphoria around helium, and then in 2022, people thought DePIN was dead, and now you're seeing a resurgence. So I think if you're going to back any vertical, but especially DePIN, you have to take a multi-year, probably decade-plus view, especially just given the hardware and CapEx component with a lot of these DePIN networks. So our first investment in the DePIN space was really in 2021 in Nova Labs, which is the company behind Helium, and we've made a number of investments over the past couple of years. And as we look at teams that are launching today, or even our existing portfolio companies, we're spending a lot of time looking at the team's background. I mean, each of these companies and protocols are trying to disrupt, trillion-dollar-plus industries, right? You can't just come off the street, have a deck, and try to go after AT&T or Google. You have to have some deep industry expertise and then layer that on with some of the crypto native elements. So we spend a lot of time looking at the team, the underlying market opportunity, what are the issues, right? Not every major industry needs to be disrupted by DePIN, but there are certain industries like wireless where there are clearly a ton of inefficiencies, rent seekers, and that's where new players can come in on the decentralized side. So I would say team, the underlying market opportunity, and then where a protocol or a network can actually offer customers, 5 or 10x better experience. I don't think you can offer someone a 10% better experience. It has to be a 5 or 10x better experience.
Makes sense. For any like young or old DePIN entrepreneurs in the crowd right now, do you have any like advice for them to get to the path to like actually come to Dragonfly, come to ParaFi, and say, I'm ready for a Series A round?
Yeah, I can take that. I would say, and I think this is true for crypto writ large, right? I think when we spend our entire lives in the space, it's easy to forget just how, and people say it all the time, but like just how tiny of a percentage of even the global economy this is, right? So the question of like, is there demand for this project is something that I think a lot of people don't spend enough time thinking about. There's a big difference, I think, between building a company and building great technology. And I think smart people often make the trap of thinking that great technology naturally builds into a great product, company, whatever. Peter Thiel has a line where he says, nerds often forget that it takes hard work to make sales look easy. And I think nowhere is that more true than in crypto, where a lot of projects, a lot of people are building things that are much closer to like Linux or Seagate SSDs, where it's like great and it really impacts the world, but there's no moat around it, right? So there's two parts to any company. It's how do you create value, and then how do you capture it? And I would spend and concentrate all my time and energy on making sure I answer that in the most seamless way possible.
Yeah, so for founders out there, I think if you're, I'll maybe break this out early stage versus late stage. So if you're early stage and you're trying to disrupt, some legacy industry, from the investor's perspective, the diligence is likely going to be more qualitative on the company side, right? So what is the team's background? Are they best suited to go after this opportunity? What is the underlying market structure? Where are their inefficiencies, challenges? Where can a decentralized network come in and really disrupt? What is the total demand side spend, right? There are several kind of DePIN projects I've chatted with in the past, and when you actually unpack how much centralized players are paying for a certain service, it's actually not that much. So the TAM isn't that great. So early stage, I think it's far more qualitative. And then on the market side, it's actually way more quantitative, right? So that's looking at the major players. What are their unit economics? What are their margins? What are the key parts of the stack that can be disrupted? And then if you've kind of reached the Helium or more later stage side on the DePIN, as a DePIN protocol, the diligence becomes a lot more quantitative, right? So you're looking at what does the supply side network look like? How much demand is there? If there isn't demand, what does the potential revenue generation opportunity look like? We like to spend a lot of time just understanding the unit economics, right? So if you have a mature DePIN protocol, you're giving away all these tokens, well, what's the actual return on that investment, right, in terms of the revenue that's being generated? And then talking to customers, looking at churn, retention, all of your typical metrics. But I would say the difference is fairly stark if you're early stage versus late stage.
Got it. Are there any unique challenges to like DePIN protocols and DePIN founders more generally, I guess, to get to a Series A? Like something that's like unique to the DePIN industry that they have some headwinds that maybe DeFi protocols or other team verticals like don't have?
Yeah, I think it's the demand side. I think that's the most critical part. And there isn't a magic number you have to have 5 million, 10 million, 100 million of ARR. I think some validation from the underlying customers that, hey, we have the opportunity to go use AT&T or go use Comcast, but actually we choose to use Helium or we choose to use Andrina, is really, really important. So it's either you've gotten feedback from the underlying customers that say, here's the 5-10x unlock that my DePIN protocol offers that's significantly better than a centralized service, or if you've actually started generating revenue, understanding what that revenue breakdown looks like, who are the largest customers, are they churning, is there some incentive mechanism going on? So I think the demand side validation is probably the best way to stand out as a DePIN protocol. You have a bunch of networks that have scaled the supply side but actually haven't brought on the demand side. So it's either direct revenue or at least line of sight towards revenue, I think, is the big differentiation from going from a seed early stage DePIN protocol to Series A and beyond.
Yeah, I would add there, when we talk about challenges the DePIN companies face, I mean, I think that a lot of it comes down to complex coordination, which is you're basically combining both atoms and bits. And I think crypto has somewhat solved a lot of the incentive and trust problems when it comes to composable bits, right? Because it's like you're making ones and zeros and you're kind of moving them. But as crypto slowly starts to devour the world, which you're kind of seeing already, how do you get people to do what you want? And how do you get people to move in the ways that you kind of expect them to move? There's no solution to that because like that would basically be like psycho history, right? But I think some of the companies that we've seen have slowly started to change people's expectations about trust and incentives, because in most industries in the world, there's no reason to behave in proper ways, right? You have regulatory capture. Like, in fact, most of the US economy is cornered around these like inexorable cost percentages of like healthcare and finance and all those things. But to really break that, I think you have to bake in trust and incentives into how people think and operate and work.
So Anjan, I think you brought up ARR before. Both ParaFi and Dragonfly have invested in multiple verticals in DePIN space, in wireless and cloud compute. 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now, what sub-vertical within DePIN do you think is actually going to be the first to hit 100 million ARR, a billion ARR? Actually, like you see the network effects actually take off in like fundamental revenue.
Yeah, I'll go with wireless, and it's not that I'm bearish on other segments that you mentioned, but I think with wireless, as you've seen what Helium has done on the telecom side, or what even Andrina could potentially do with Dawn, the key difference is the demand side line of sight. you don't really have to squint to see where the demand could come from for something like wireless, right? You have hundreds of millions of mobile customers, Wi-Fi customers on both commercial and on the retail side. And so those customers are looking for cost advantages to potentially move over. Maybe there's quality of service issues. Maybe there's an opportunity for them to build on top of the network. So that's the vertical I think you don't have to squint as much to see the demand side. On the AI side, I think long-term we're constructive, but there's a lot of open questions on what the demand looks like, right? With wireless, you have a very sticky user base. It's recurring. And with these networks, there are structural cost and performance advantages they have. And I think it's a much easier sell for users to come over in wireless than in many other verticals.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the answer as if we weren't like talking our book. So I think the
disclosure.
I mean, wireless and compute, I think these are all somewhat priced in, right? Where like people kind of know there'll be big markets. I mean, they're already big markets, but they kind of know that crypto will already begin to just like enter all these things. But I think looking back, maybe 10, 15 years from now at this moment, I think we are really in an interesting phase of just energy generation. And we haven't made a bet in that space yet, but I mean, I'm super excited to kind of see how compute, storage, bandwidth, and energy are all actually the same thing in some sense. Like if you look at where most internet traffic comes from today, it's bots. Most things or entities that use smart contracts today are bots, right? And I think these will all be powered by more efficient ways of energy generation that we're not thinking about today. I know a bunch of people here are thinking about that. And this bleeds into wireless and compute and everything else. But we can't really, I think OpenAI just posted about it this week where they will hit energy scaling limits on GPT-6 and 7. And so if that is a cost curve that everyone is underwriting, then everyone's like out of luck, right? So I think we have to think more fundamentally about crypto and science and energy than, I guess, focusing more on like what is currently seen to us.
So I've been in space for a while. I've seen a lot of centralized developer companies that are technically like technical service providers for decentralized networks. These decentralized networks hit some kind of escape velocity, but none of the tokens actually like generate any value. They're effectively used as governance tokens. So Ani, I want to ask you a question. Like, what gives you conviction that like in DePIN, these tokens actually will be critical to like the long-term viability of these protocols and of these networks?
Yeah, I can take that off. So we're basically only in the second decade really of crypto. And I think people forget that a lot. And the biggest analogy, even though like reasoning analogy by sucks most of the time, is the biggest way I think for people to wrap their minds around it is like it took about 200 years for since the invention of the joint stock company in 1555 for people to really understand where does equity value come from. And right now the stock market is kind of filled with, you have intangible book value and tangible book value. It's like many stocks don't trade off fundamentals. They trade in sort of this like weird speculative bubble, right? And I think crypto in the first decade was a lot more like that. And I think as we get to the end of this decade, we'll see ways to separate and secularize speculation, fundamentals, and a lot better tokenomics, which is something that I think Adreno has just done and Daylight Energy did with the medallion system. And I find that very exciting, I think, with like what are the ways in which we can create better incentives using tokens, NFTs, whatever, in a very easy consumer choice way that people will just want to use. And we're nowhere near the end of that, I think. And that's kind of what makes me excited, that the white space is so massive. Yeah. And I think when we get the brightest people on Earth into this room to solve this problem, we're going to see amazing things happen.
So Anjan, just to follow up on that, I think ParaFi has invested in Oxio and Andrina. They're both like 4 to 5 years in their journey of like building out the network, building out their, finding product market fit. But neither of them have tokens. From your perspective, and maybe from ParaFi's perspective, when is the right time to launch a token? Some protocols start from day one. Obviously, Andrina and Oxio are obviously trying to find product market fit with that one, which I think personally might be the right decision, but would love to hear from your perspective, like when is the right time to do it, to really add fuel to the fire?
Yeah, and maybe right before that, I'll give you the quick answer to the previous question, which I think most could be 85, 90% of the DePIN protocol tokens will actually not have a lot of value, but the small percentage, 5, 10%, will capture a massive percentage of value. So I think in aggregate, a ton of tokens won't actually accrue value, but the small percentage will end up capturing a good amount of value if they're thoughtful around the model. I think the right time to launch a token, look, I don't think there's a perfect answer. I think it very much depends on where you are as a DePIN network and what you want the token to do, right? Do you need the token to get the supply side going, or can you get the supply side going without the token? If it is 100% critical to get the supply side activated by having a token, you may have to launch that token fairly early on. There are probably 100 downsides to that, so it has to be absolutely critical because you can't go back to launching the token in the earlier days. What we like to see is an established Web2 business build in a vertical that they've been able to generate revenue, attract customers, figure out their unique advantage on the product and cost side, and at the right time, launch a token to really supercharge that growth. Because the other part of the DePIN kind of stack that's not talked about as much is this tension between equity and token. So a lot of DePIN networks will have this token out there trading in the market, but there's this equity component to companies building on top. This is a super critical kind of value question to think about, which is there are scenarios where a DePIN protocol can be wildly successful, but the equity captures most, if not all, value. Or there are scenarios where the token captures most, if not all, value. So understanding, if you start off as a company, where does the equity capture value and what is its business model, and making sure it's complementary to the token is critical, right? You don't want to be in scenarios where the token and equity are at odds with each other, because that creates a number of issues down the line. So in general, like to see like an established business generating ARR, figuring out their kind of specific space in the vertical that they're disrupting, and then using a token to supercharge their growth. I don't think there's a universal, like you have to reach this amount of ARR or at this point in the business. I think it varies a lot by the protocol.
Yeah, let me touch on that really quick. I think one of the most interesting parts about what we do is like seeing just the rate of this like Schumpeterian destruction velocity just keep going up and up and up, right? It's like endless acceleration. But you know, they always say like if software eats the world, software companies eat software companies first. And that I think is most true of crypto, where like the rate of, say, vampire attacks or anything else, and the rate of startups in crypto dying versus any other industry is probably like top quartile in crypto, right? So I think in this case, what is exciting is how can crypto companies and projects harness tokens to apply a lot of the same methodologies we use in this space, like say vampire attacks. I've met a lot of founders here who've been thinking about kind of aggrandizing their own supply using vampire attacks and like, you know, Web2 industries, right? And I think all these various tactics that, like if you harken back like 20 years in the software business that people did to oil and gas industries and all those things, I think once crypto companies use the same sort of methodology to businesses today, you'll find something very interesting.
Awesome. I don't know how much time we have, but I will ask one more question and maybe open it up to the crowd to see if anyone has any questions for either of you. What is your like your non-consensus take on DePIN? Like, what do you think is like maybe an overhyped subvertical within the space?
I would say a little bit more concern on our side is the crypto AI DePIN. I think long-term constructive, short-term, I'm personally more skeptical. And look, if you're building in this space, come find me after this. I think the amount of money that's going into that vertical relative to the demand side and the line of sight to the demand side, there's a huge mismatch. And then I know a lot of people talk about like the GPU shortages, and we've heard that quite a bit. And you know, when you talk to the AI kind of developers and companies, and they're not rushing to use a decentralized, you know, GPU marketplace quite yet. They cite, you know, cost issues or performance issues, lack of inventory. There are a number of issues there. So I think long term there's space for decentralized GPU marketplaces as just one example of the intersection between AI and DePIN. But I think the mismatch between the amount of dollars going to that vertical relative to the output is quite stark right now.
That is not good for my bags, I'll tell you that. How about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, you know, probably the most contrarian thing I could say is that in some sense there is no DePIN space today. I think we are just motivated by the same thing. But I think if you asked everyone in this room, everyone has a different idea of what like DePIN actually means, right? And I think over the next few years you'll start to see that actually acquiesce and like amalgate into something that like regular people understand, because it sort of is the narcissism of small differences, where it's like we can be in this room and like people will argue over innate differences in energy generation or something. But I think for this to really scale, and I think it will take a lot longer than people think, we have to sort of get on the same page of where we see DePIN itself going, right? And yeah, it comes to like supporting each other, and we try to be a positive sum influence in the space, given just how tiny everything is still. And I think as long as we have all the vectors moving in the same spot, it's an inevitable global movement. So,
Thank you. So that's all the questions I have. Yeah, we already have some audience questions. This is great.
So thanks for the panel. I like the play you make between energy and AI training. I think very few people understand the implications that has in single statement in terms of clean and nuclear energy. I want to ask this question based on something that's run a deep wireless network. Who's actually making money of this stuff? Because to me, I look at the economics of all this stuff, and it's very, very early. So who's making money today? Who do you think will be making money in the next couple of years? Maybe one answer and then we wrap it.
Yeah,
so
sure.
sorry, when you say who's making money, do you mean in that energy generation AI stuff, or in DePIN? Yeah, I mean, Andrina is one example. Like, I think what Andrina and Don have begun to do has really taken off in a way that like none of us have expected. And there's many examples like that, right? I don't want to be, it's very overdetermined as to how much you can say, but we are right at the precipice, I think, of like, a year ago when I came and did the same panel, basically, it was like no one was really making money, but now I think there's like 5 to 10s of the companies in this room that could hit Series B, like revenue expectations next year, which if you asked me a year ago, I would have been shocked, I think. We can talk more after this, but yeah, there's a bunch.
I know we're up on time. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.